Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for the week ending in December 6th, 2024. This is a special episode because we will be focused on the Skrmetti hearings and the protests at the U.S. Supreme Court, which occurred on Wednesday, December 4th. As a reminder, U.S. versus Skrmetti is the case where the Supreme Court will decide on whether Tennessee's ban on medical transition for trans-identified minors is constitutional. And we have two special guests, Candice Jackson and Glenna Goldis, both of whom are lesbians and LGB advocates, both of whom are lawyers, and both of whom were at the protests in front of the Supreme Court on December 4th. For those of you who don't already know, Candice is the former acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights and the Deputy General Counsel at the U.S. Department of Education, and Glenna, aka the Unyielding Bicyclist, is the author of the Bad Facts Substack that discusses the history of transgender activism and gay rights. My name is Ariane. We are also joined by Carol, Joss, as well as Sylvia. And Sylvia, it should be noted, was also at the Skrmetti protests representing LGB Alliance USA and also gave a speech. So Sylvia, with that, I'll hand it over to you to discuss the protests.
Thank you. Yeah, it was nothing but exhilarating, I'd say. My speech was around 8:30, 8:15-ish, so I was one of the first few speakers. And it was just really important for me and LGB Alliance to be there to drive home the point that child gender transition or youth gender transition is a form of modern day conversion therapy. So the speech I gave really tried to articulate that because it's a perspective that is not talked about. There's a lot of reasons to be against child gender transition, and this is definitely one of them, and it needs to be talked about because people who are gay are more likely to be transed as children. They're at a higher risk, I would say, to experience gender dysphoria and then to be medically transitioned. So I think that there were a number of people there, particularly, I mean, I was gonna say on the conservative side, but truthfully on both sides, left and right, that had never heard this perspective before. So I showed up with our sign that said gender medicine equals conversion therapy that I worked really hard on and I was really proud of, and it made me so happy every time I saw some stranger pick up the sign and be like, whoa, and hold it up. We also had our LGB Alliance banner that I was super hyped about having there, and it only got stepped on a few times, only a couple of which were intentional and, with malice, but overall it was well received, I'd say. And a lot of people were really, really grateful to have a gay presence there. I think a lot of people that are same-sex attracted, lesbian, gay, or bisexual, feel that they either have to be on the trans train or they have no community. And we are here to prove them wrong. They have community here, and there are rational people that are against child transition who are also gay. Yeah.
I heard a lot of noise coming out of the other side. How big was the turnout? Like our side versus the other side. I was curious how many people were there. I couldn't get a good read on that from video.
There were two sides of the courthouse that were filled. We were on, I guess, if technically the left side, if you're facing away from the court. And we had probably about 150, maybe 200 people. And we, I think, outnumbered the other side until about 10:30, 11, when a big group of people were bussed in from who knows where, and then they kind of outnumbered us. So we don't have the funds to hire people to protest on our behalf, but if we did, we would surely outnumber them as well. But we had a lot of people there that were there from the beginning. I feel a little bad because someone on our side was playing a lot of bluegrass country music, which is not my favorite genre of music. And I didn't make the connection that it had to do with like Tennessee and they were trying to represent the Tennessee culture. So I made some snippy comment about like, well, you know, a lesbian's not in charge of this music choice. And I think Glenna was like, what do you mean you don't like country? And I went, no, am I bigoted towards country? And she was like, maybe a little bit. Uh, no, but the music was fine on our side. But the other side was doing a lot of like, you know, top 100 hits and, you know, Lady Gaga, Chappell Roan, the whoever does the Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. They had a lot of really catchy songs, but the two that really stood out to me were when they chose to play Lady Gaga's Born This Way. I'm beautiful in my way because God makes no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way, which to me feels very much like it's advocating for our side, which is don't change anything. You were born this way and be proud of that. So I don't think they thought that one through. And then the other one was when they played the song Sweet Dreams that go, you know, some of them want to abuse you, some of them want to be abused. That's in the, you know, and I heard that. I was like, really, that's going to be the song that you choose to represent your side that you're dancing to? You know what? Okay, sure. Double down. Love it. But I don't think they had that much self-awareness. They were definitely trying to drown us out. So if anybody who listens to my speech is like, why is Sylvia yelling right now? It's because they were trying to drown us out. They had one guy who I don't know what was going on with him, but he was just combative from 7:30. I think, yeah, he called me a Nazi and it was about 7:15 in the morning. And I was like, sir, I haven't even had my second cup of coffee yet. Can we, okay?
It's way too early to be called a Nazi. Way too early.
Right?
I noticed that they had the, you know, the horns and the beeping and it's like how juvenile, how undemocratic of you to behave like a 4-year-old, basically, you know?
Yeah. I had one, I guess you could call it positive interaction with someone who supports gender transition of minors. She was holding a sign that said something along the lines of like, prohibiting gender affirming care is conversion therapy, or prohibiting trans youth from transitioning is conversion therapy, something along those lines. My sign said gender medicine equals conversion therapy. So I was like, well, this would be a great photo op. And someone said, go ask her. So I went up to her. I was like, excuse me. I mean, I couldn't help but notice you also have a conversion therapy sign. Would you be willing to take a photo with me and these signs? And she looked so shocked and just like, no, thank you. That's exactly how she said it. And I was just like, okay, thought I'd ask. And I turned around. But that I was just like, this, come on. This is the peak, you know, two sides both accusing each other of conversion therapy. And it's a shame that she wasn't at least interested in trying to understand my side. That was the other thing too, is that I saw a lot of people who would walk past me, and I think Glenna was holding the sign that said stop transing gay kids, or at least we were around somebody who was holding that sign. So passersby would see the sign stop transing gay kids and then see my sign gender medicine equals conversion therapy, and you could see them doing the math in their head and thinking about it. And you could always see the moment their brain exploded and sometimes they would turn to the person they were talking to and be like, what does that mean? And I would read their lips, conversion therapy, gender medicine conversion therapy. What's that talking about? And I saw one trans woman kind of be like, oh, that's just turf rhetoric, whatever. And I was like, okay. But then a lot of people like would take a picture of it. Some of them would kind of smile and nod and take a picture of it. So I think there's a lot of people that know this to be true, that gender medicine is a form of conversion therapy. And they just have never seen it spoken out before. I'll give someone else a chance to chat, but there's a lot that can be said because it was quite an eventful morning.
I really want to dig into the legal side of it and the analysis of what you heard and read in the transcripts. You know, Glenna had some transcript breakdown that which was really fantastic, and Candice, I really want to dig in with both of you and hear what you thought about the case with the lawyers, the questions that both sides were kind of how they were responding and what the justices were asking them.
Glenna, you want to jump in first? Sure. Well, I'm curious, Candice, were you in the courtroom?
No, I did not get any kind of pass to go in and listen to the oral argument. So after I spoke at the rally, when the argument had started, I went to a quiet space and tuned into the live stream so that I could hear the oral argument going on live, but wasn't inside.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I encountered it by I read transcripts starting on the ride home to New York because I was very excited. Well, I wasn't sure I was going to, but then I saw headlines and then I was like, I have to see if the headline is accurate because I don't trust them. And then I was just into it. And so then I wound up reading everything. And one thing to note is that this argument was supposed to be an hour and it went for 2.5 hours. And they were especially focused on asking questions of the Solicitor General, who was, arguing against Tennessee on the side of the ACLU. So that level of engagement was really interesting. Some of the justices were asking really good questions. So that would be Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, who are, known to be the most conservative justices. So as many of us have commented as liberals, it's novel to be sharing your way through the transcripts at those two. And so the types of things they picked up on. So Alito was really talking about the Cass review. And also what I loved was that he was pressing the ACLU and Department of Justice on their statements about suicide, because they really come close to the line of being dishonest when they talk about suicide at court. Because, as we know, there are no studies to support what they say publicly, which is that this prevents suicide. And, there's some evidence to suggest that it definitely makes mental health worse. And then there's evidence that people who've gone through all the treatments have a much higher suicide rate than the general population. So there's nothing scientific going in their favor, but they are always trying to insinuate in court and kind of come up to the line of saying certain things. And Alito picked up on that and he pressed both attorneys on it. And I think that's really important also, just as a matter of kind of preserving the integrity of the proceedings. Let's drill down there. And the attorneys, the Solicitor General, I don't think she backed down. And Strangio from the ACLU said oh, well, we're really talking about suicidality, not suicide. And so that was interesting. Suicidality means threats to kill yourself, which we know is almost practically encouraged in trans culture, really disturbingly. So anyway, so Strangio was kind of backed down off of that. But it was interesting to see that Alito caught that and he was upset by it because he should be upset by it as a justice. And Thomas had some kind of sly questions, which were interesting. And he kind of got at the fact that testosterone is harming girls, which I think was really important because that gets lost a lot of times with the litigation over this matters, especially in the this particular type of lawsuit, which is related to the bans on gender medicine for kids in all these states. They really focus on detransitioners and regret, but you don't hear as much about they are objectively harming every single kid who takes these drugs. And you just don't hear the long litanies of side effects, or if they do come out, it's a little bit secondary. So I appreciated that some of the justices were saying, no, hold it, I do want to hear about that, let's focus. I think that is really good. On the other end of the spectrum, we had, it's painful to talk about, but the 3 liberal women justices were just kind of humiliating all of us who have ever defended them, or I don't even know what to say. They were just so unprofessional and emotional, especially. They were obviously trying to get these made for TV moments out of the proceedings. So when they're asking questions of somebody that they like, they're asking these leading questions, which are really just statements of fact that they like, which they want to be promoted in the media. And then when they're talking to the Solicitor General of Tennessee at the end, they're just ripping into him, and they have this disdain dripping from their voice. I've heard this before because in my blog, as we've said, I go and I listen to oral arguments sometimes at appellate courts, and I read lots of transcripts. So I know what the deal is. I know these judges have some attitude, but to hear it at the Supreme Court was dispiriting. And so that is just a cold block of ice. Those 3 are going to write some wild opinions. And so then there's the people in the middle. I won't go through all of them, but we have Justice Gorsuch. Everyone is watching for him and waiting to see what he did, because he wrote the only other Supreme Court decision on so-called trans rights a few years back, but he did not say a word. And so that's just making everybody come up with theories, I guess. And yeah, so I was very excited to read that, and I'm curious to hear what Candice thought.
Yeah, well, one overall takeaway that I thought was on one hand very frustrating, and on the other hand I started thinking, well, this is going to be good in the long run to have it portrayed this way. the three liberal justices that you were focused on, and their sort of cavalier and pointed and bad analogy style of questioning back and forth with the federal government's lawyer and the ACLU lawyer. One takeaway from that I found appalling, but yet good for us, is they really ended up taking hormones for gender purposes seem and sound extremely superficial. Well, hey, a 15-year-old boy who wants a deeper voice should be able to take testosterone. So a 15-year-old girl who wants a deeper voice to support her own masculinity should be able to take them too, right? I mean, it really came off shallow, and it really came off as just this, we're all supposed to accept that medicine has jumped the shark and gone into, it really is just consumer driven, pick and choose. You want a little bit of you want a little bit of facial hair here, or you don't, or, you want a little deeper voice, or you don't, or it's just, but it's very shallow and it's very superficial sounding, which is appalling, because I don't know that the conservative justices or the Tennessee attorney hammered quite strong and hard enough on how harmful, like you're saying, how harmful cross-sex hormones are, how harmful it is to just sort of pick and choose and experiment and put in your body a flood of hormones that your body's not designed to handle. It's not just a preference or a choice thing. There's this element of objective harm to your health doing it. And that didn't really get put out there. So the seriousness, the long-term consequences that are completely different if you're talking about giving testosterone to a male or testosterone to a female, the depth of seriousness of harm and the long-term harm didn't really come through, I feel like, nearly strongly enough as it should, which was frustrating. But I was thinking, in some way, in the bigger picture, we can use this, because there is this weird schism. I feel like when you watch a lot of videos of trans-identified people doing their 1 or 2 minute TikToks, doing their trans influencer thing and talking about their journey and their medicalization step by step, one thing you see a lot is they'll throw out there every once in a while, of course, this saved my life, but the day-to-day or the moment-to-moment things that they're trying to get across to people starts to seem pretty shallow. Like, look at this t-shirt I can wear now. Isn't that awesome? Like, okay, but that's why we're doing this trade-off, right? That's why we're asking permission from all of society to upend everything and let people experiment with extremely dangerous med tech protocols, is so that you can wear a different t-shirt that you like better. I mean it just, there's a weird paradox on the trans side between this being some very deep and profound and almost spiritual inner authenticity experience that you have to live your authentic life, and also it's very like, well, now I can go to the beach. I mean, it's I don't know, it's that's a dynamic that I thought was weird to have highlighted in the Supreme Court arguments of all places.
I noticed that they were really trying to get, the liberal judges were trying to get the attorney to say that it was sex-based, right? Because that's their whole thing, is it's sex-based discrimination. And I felt bad for him, to be quite honest. And I was like, oh my God, this poor guy. And now, so 2 questions here. What's with the sex-based thing? And do they only have to address that as the core, or can they look at other stuff? Because they were making it sound like they only had to address one thing.
Two parts about the is this law making a sex-based classification? First of all, one of the background pieces of that you hear throughout the argument is the liberal side and the pro-trans side trying to make this sound like it is all about stereotypes, ironically, right? Not the truth of the matter, which is that the pro-trans side is the one that is embracing stereotypes and cementing them and reifying them, and then using medical technology to try to manifest embodying a set of stereotypes. But no, they really are trying to flip that and make it sound like doing things that are physiologically in accordance with the natural and healthy growth and development of being the sex you are, that's a stereotype. And whether you choose to conform to that or not conform to that is itself choosing to either accept your stereotypes or reject them. So that's one weird background thing that to me was very clear throughout the arguments. So the sex-based issue is because the question the Supreme Court took up in this case came down to saying, is Tennessee's law creating a distinction, a sex-based distinction under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution would mean that the courts would have to scrutinize this law and only let it pass if it meets an intermediate level of scrutiny from the courts. So for decades now, the Supreme Court has said that sex-based distinctions, saying, for example, college admissions, if a college says women can't be admitted, men can, that's a very sex-based distinction. And we're not just going to let a government agency get away with saying, well, we think that's a good thing, so let it pass. We're going to scrutinize it in an intermediate way and make the government show that there is a very important purpose that's being served by this law. And with Tennessee's law, it would be better for all of us on our side if the answer to that question is no, because it would mean that Tennessee's law could stand under no heightened scrutiny, just the basic, is there a rational basis for this law? If so, the state gets to do what it wants here. The trick is that and what the Tennessee lawyer had to encounter with the justices, frankly, there were questions going to, is this sex-based from both the liberal and conservative justices? So I am a little nervous that we are somehow going to end up with heightened scrutiny here. And that's because technically, whether you're male or female, you could think of it as that matters under this law. Whether you're male or female matters. Now, the Tennessee lawyer did a good job in trying to say, no, this isn't about treating males and females differently. This is about everybody, whether you're male or female, is prohibited from seeking these procedures, these treatments, if they're doing it for a certain purpose, if they're doing it for the purpose of conforming to the sex that they aren't. And so he made a good argument, he made the best argument you can, which is that this is about everybody, no matter if you're male or female, if you're under a certain age, and if you're seeking these things for the purpose of being inconsistent with your sex, that's what triggers your inability to get these treatments. For the geeks out there who want to go look this up, go and find the 7th Circuit decision from early November that upheld the Indiana ban on pediatric gender treatments, because the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals just a month ago handled this question really, really well. And what they said was that this is not a sex-based law. The law's purpose is not to treat men and women differently, males and females differently. The law's purpose is to withhold medicine from or medications and procedures that are dangerous and experimental and unproven from minors. So it's an age-based distinction, not a sex-based distinction. And just because a law happens to have to recognize that there are differences between males and females because it's in a medical context doesn't mean that that's what the law is about. So I hope that's the direction the Supreme Court ends up on that question. But again, because there were probing questions about whether it's sex-based by both the conservative and the liberal justices, I'm a little nervous about what we might end up with on this. Glenna, what do you think?
I'm just so relieved to hear you say that you're nervous about this, because I've been feeling nervous too since I finished the transcripts. Everyone's been saying it's a slam dunk, and it's not. Well, there are 2 legal questions. We didn't even get to talk about the other one, just are trans people a suspect class? I think that one we're safe. I mean, just on the logic of it, I think, but like the sex-based distinctions, I think that they did put on a better show than, I mean, they had a strong presentation on a policy level. It's insane. It could lead to so much litigation, and our side should have brought that out. That's like a standard argument for lawyers to make. If you rule for the other side, there's going to be so many lawsuits. We hate that. Like, that's just a standard thing to say, and they didn't say it. So, and they even passed up an opportunity to say that, because there's something like, will this affect bathrooms or sports? And they were like, no, we haven't seen that effect. No, you should have said, yes, definitely. It'll be a huge deal. So we did the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do in the situation. It was so weird. But yeah, I think that Prologar's presentation was more logical. And so even if they want to, as a policy matter, reach something else, they didn't get what they needed out of this argument.
And let's make it clear for our audience that if we lose on the issue of this kind of law now has to undergo intermediate scrutiny, it doesn't mean that Tennessee's law wouldn't be upheld. What it would mean, though, is that it could get kicked back down to the intermediate court again to say, now you have to evaluate whether Tennessee is allowed to ban this under a heightened scrutiny standard. So it's not a good thing, but it also doesn't mean that the law couldn't be upheld in the end. It just might take a while longer and would mean that Tennessee would have to dive into the medical evidence more than it has had to so far.
Yeah, I have a question that I think might be related to this. When I was listening to the arguments, one thing I've noticed while listening to the conservative justices is Alito in particular, who we already said was one of the most conservative justices. He was really into the whole science of, is transgender medicine valid or not? And I think even Thomas asked some questions about it. But then Amy Coney Barrett seemed to kind of completely dismiss the importance of that question. Like she said, oh, this European stuff isn't really the issue here with the Cass report. And then Kavanaugh, he at one point said, well, regardless of whether or not there's a ban, people will be harmed. And his focus seemed to be more on the constitutional legal issue of it. And that maybe was a little bit of a red flag to me, that there's a little bit of squishiness with Barrett and Kavanaugh. And I'm curious if you read that the same way.
The squishiness for different reasons for both of them. I do agree with you. For Kavanaugh, I think the good thing for the result on our side of this is that I think what his questions amounted to indicate that he wants to look at this as a states' rights issue. And that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, if that indicates that he's willing to say, hey, there's harms on both sides from these treatments, whether you withhold them or give them, therefore let a state dive in and do what it wants on this issue, and this is going to end up being like a red blue state, thing like abortion is right now. Okay, I mean, we can, at least at that point we would have, these, 25, 26 states that would be allowed to continue banning this. Fine. Amy Coney Barrett disappointed me on a lot of levels. It was a little frustrating. For one thing, more than the other justices, she was using phrasing like assigned sex at birth. Like, why? What are you doing? Are you trying to be cool? She was trying to be cool. I honestly think that. It was really embarrassing, actually. Like this, conservative who gets picked on. I think she was just trying to be hip, which is cringe. But she went the distance to really try to make it sound like this is something that can be harm either way. And she sounded more substantively than Kavanaugh did, open to the possibility that this is making a serious sex-based distinction and not grasping at all that this is a matter of avoidable harm versus unavoidable harm.
Wasn't Barrett also asking interesting questions about going to the question of whether trans is a protected class?
Yes, she also revealed herself to be a bit of an idiot on that, which was also fascinating. She noted that she asked Chase Strangio whether there was any, isn't it true that there's never been any de jure discrimination against, a group called transgender people throughout history? And when Chase Strangio, accurately, by the way, came back and said, well, there have been, criminalized cross-dressing laws. By the way, none of those have been in effect for a century. I mean, decades at least, many, many, many decades. But yes, they can point to that. And I don't know how far that gets anybody anyway to say that those were never intended to be against a group called transgender, right? It was more about enforcing sex-based stereotypes against all of us. So, but whatever. But anyway, the fact that she didn't know that that had ever existed in our country, and then was like, oh, well, now that I know that, then, oh, maybe there is reason to believe that transgender people have always been discriminated against and have been kept out of law and society, and that's terrible. So the whole thing was very gross.
I say that the history of the cross-dressing laws is so interesting because actually, yeah, they were on the books. And then in the 60s and 70s, the way they started to come off the books or stop applying to people was that so-called transsexuals started arguing that they shouldn't have to follow the law. So they started getting carve-outs from the cross-dressing laws as soon as they announced themselves.
Glenna, that's brilliant. I wish you had been up there to whisper in Amy Coney Barrett's ear, like, don't fall for this. This is stupid, and you're making yourself look like an idiot.
So that was one thing that I really noticed when I was rubbing shoulders with my conservative colleagues on the side of the protesting, and even at the luncheon afterwards, where I was listening to Help Not Harm give their presentation about policies they're putting forth, is that they really sounded like they missed the mark on how to approach this problem of children transitioning. In their mind, they kept using the phrase, we got to just get the genie back in the bottle, right? Like they're just trying to end these child transitionings from happening. They're trying to stop gender ideology from being in schools, which sure, I can get with. But I'm like, you need to know how we even got here. Like, how did we get to the point where having a little boy, get genital reconstruction surgery even an option? How did we get here? And I think that conservatives, I mean, liberals obviously too, but the conservatives that are fighting this are lacking a, dare I say it, a lesbian feminist perspective that would really help them out and would give them so much more nuance, clarity, and what's the word I'm looking for? Validity in their arguing against it. I mean, I am hopeful in believing that classic conservatives are more gay friendly these days. That was kind of the vibe that I was picking up on. Maybe I'm just a stupid optimist. But I think that they're willing to listen now, and it's really going to be really important for gay people, even the ones who lean left, but who are against this sort of thing, to be able to have conversations with conservatives and, like family first type foundations that maybe kind of feel anti-gay, but they're also, maybe trying to be better. Like, I think this is an opportunity for us to, I'm not even gonna say ally with them, but to be like, hey, listen to me and you'll win, like that might be what needs to happen. And I just wanted to jump in and say that.
That's a really interesting point, because if you look at the amicus brief, some of the strongest ones on this case were filed by feminist organizations, and that's been true in other trans cases as well. So like Wolf and WDI, Karadansky in there. And they're the strongest in part because they go after the foundations of the thing, and they point out what any lawyer should be able to point out, which is that the ACLU does not define sex or gender. And that's why they get away with so much later on in the argument, because nobody challenged them at step one. And so that's outrageous. But for some reason, nobody can do that except feminists.
This makes me think about how I think for us gay folks who are trying to fight against gender ideology, we do have to go back 30, 40 years now, and we have to basically re-engage with the other side, re-engage with Christians and conservatives, and talk to them like we did early on to basically humanize us and let them know that we're not the boogeymen, we're not after your kids, like all the things we had to do. I almost feel like personally, like I've had to do some of that work too when I've been around conservatives and very Christian conservatives.
I think that's a great point. And, probably unlike several of you, I grew up and have been, even in my adult life, right of center. And so I have always had that uncomfortable feeling of not fitting into like my own tribe. And it has shifted. I honestly do believe that overall it has shifted for groups on the right to be a lot less frightened of gays. And, the last 10 years or so of the wildness of and just the cultural nihilism that is coming from the trans queer side of things has, if anything, I think, proven to a lot of conservative and Christian sorts that there is actually such a thing as normal gay people, and that we're not the scary ones just because we happen to have same-sex partners. Like we're just not very frightening. It's this ideology that has taken over and is actually the boogeyman that wants to come after your kids and wants to destroy foundational traditions in society, blah, blah, blah. So I think there's a lot of room for that. I think that we better do it soon, and we better do it in a concerted and deliberate way, and not delay, because I'm also sensing a backlash, and that's very, very sad and unfortunate. I'm sensing a renewed willingness of some, the fraction on the right that just went underground with their homophobia and just sort of kept quiet about it because most of the right was coming to a tolerance level with homosexuality. But that little minority on the right is feeling like they have permission right now to speak up again and say, told ya, it all started when those gays got to marry. I mean, yeah, gotta reverse this. So it's sad, but we're in the right framework right now to take advantage of, and I think you're right, Sylvia. It's not so much ally with, but it is discourse with. Have those conversations. You know, don't be the ones that, well, I won't platform so and so because they went to Heritage or whatever. You know, no, have the conversations, be on the panels, you know, have these discussions, because they want to get it. Most of them on the right, I think right now, want to get this right. And you're right that they do not have the depth of understanding that would help them get this right. The good news is, though, that there's still momentum right now on the right. And you're seeing it, by the way, they've started chopping away the Q, and I think they're starting to want to chop away the T and just leave the LGB. And that's happening more and more in groups on the right. So I think we just keep up the conversations, and we're going in the right direction.
I found it personally really heartening to see all of the diverse groups that were at this function, and then how the groups themselves have talked about the event. Like there was a post on Instagram from the Family Research Council, and I never thought that I would like look to them as a source for anything, but here is this really beautiful post that included a prayer after it, but it was talking about the diversity of the groups all standing united, and that was the whole thing. That was the whole thing that was so beautiful to me, and leaning into that discourse, like you said, and having the ability to talk, like we can make movement in that way. It's the true democratic ideal of Americans in America, like to do that, to be able to work across the aisle and work with groups that you wouldn't normally work with. And then they had the pictures also of everybody that was out there. It wasn't like they were just honed in on their one message. And I thought that was really nice to see.
You know, I was watching the Matt Walsh live stream on YouTube, and in the live chat, there was, of course, you get some homophobic takes, but you get a lot of folks jumping in there going, hey, don't be a homophobe. Like, come on now. You get people saying, I'm gay, you know? So I thought that made me feel kind of good to see that even within that realm, there was folks kind of just all over the place. And honestly, the homophobes seemed to be in the minority, which I was happy to see.
Yeah, I was pleased to see that. Going back to the Supreme Court hearings, I want to make sure I have time for the questions our supporters submitted. One question about the hearings was how you interpreted Gorsuch's silence. And the other question is if you could chime in on the role that clerks play in curating the information that Supreme Court justices get.
Yeah, I'll take the Gorsuch question. Talking it through with people afterwards, etc. The most convincing take that I've seen is that Gorsuch took the lead on the 2020 Bostock decision. And even though that was not an equal protection decision, that was decided under a federal civil rights statute called Title VII for employment rights. But all the same, this question now of whether we're going to have to scrutinize a law like this under intermediate scrutiny raises a lot of the same issues that Gorsuch dealt with in Bostock. And hopefully he's sitting there quietly thinking about the can of worms that he opened for us in Bostock, and how to perhaps start to put a lid on that can, and how to get out of this without embarrassing himself. And in many ways, he should be ashamed of himself for what he did in Bostock. So I hope that that explains his silence, is that he was sitting there thinking very, very hard about how to save some face from what he did in Bostock, and yet close it down so that that is no longer used as a reason to keep it going down this road.
I mean, I don't want to overstate my knowledge of how Supreme Court clerking works, but I do believe they screen the amicus briefs, right? Because there's just like, in this case, there were something like 78 briefs. And so in terms of like bringing them to the justice's attention, I think clerks could be important in that. And that is really vital. Like I said, you have some from feminist organizations that are just getting right to the heart of things in the way that, frankly, like the parties' briefs do not. So it would be amazing if there were some clerks that flagged it for their justices.
One thing I thought, like listening to the liberal justices, is like when Justice Brown brought up like Loving versus Virginia, was it the interracial marriage case? It kind of couldn't help but feel like that she already had like she wanted to bring that up. She already had that somehow in her queue and was trying to make that work in this case. Like maybe she had been, I don't know. It's just. It seemed almost like a forced argument, like it was something that had been pre-selected for her. So I don't know.
That's definitely possible, but she seemed like personally invested in that Loving v. Virginia thing. I started to wonder, like, I wonder if she brings this up all the time in oral argument, but like most of them aren't covered by the press. I could just like imagine it being her go-to when she hates one of the parties. But anyway, that reminded me of something, which is that Sotomayor's dissent in a case called 303 Creative, like a year and a half ago, which was about like whether a cake baker in Colorado should have to bake a cake that she doesn't believe with that says like, I'm happy about gay marriage or whatever. I don't know if you guys remember that. And so it came down, you know, it's kind of a free expression thing where the law could not kind of compel her to bake the cake with that message. And Sotomayor has a dissent, which is just like this soppy, sappy mess about like homophobia. And she goes rambling on about all these things that are actually like internet controversies. Like she's like, and we know that Matthew Shepard was killed because of homophobia. It's like, actually that was disproven, but it's still like social justice warriors on the internet still fight. And Pulse nightclub shooting, which seemed like it was homophobic at the time, but then we found out that the shooter was actually really like confused by why there were no women, and he was asking people like, why are there no women in this bar? So these things have been like almost conclusively disproved, and if you research them at all on the internet, you see those articles. But I think that her clerks are just like these very online nerds, you know, young people, and they're like, I'm going to use this opportunity to get my point of view into the record. And there are a bunch of other silly things too about like how much suffering there is from a gay person not being able to get their cake baked for them. And there's like, well, you know, we want free speech rights as well as gay people. Like, you know, it's not like we're not at odds. Like yeah. So that reminded me that some of the things in there, I remember reading and thinking like, I don't think Sotomayor came up with this on her own. Like it seems internet-y to me.
Candice has to leave soon. Are there any other questions or points that you want to make, Candice? About the case or the outcome? What is your idea of what might happen?
Yeah, that's the scary question, isn't it? Well, first of all, we're probably waiting a full 6 months to hear. Everybody seems to be expecting that this will go for release when they often do in June, which will make for an interesting Pride Month. I think it's important to temper our hopes and expectations for this case. It is the first huge case that has gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, even touching these issues. So there's a lot of reason to be excited about it. But I think that what we're going to have to be prepared for is that it won't be a fully satisfying, you know, some kind of full clear victory. I don't think it's going to be as total a shutdown as it could be. I don't think we're going to get as just blatant a smackdown of the premises for gender medicine as there should be. And I think what we're gonna be looking at is, at the end of the day, I'm still banking on Tennessee's law either being flat out upheld or, you know, sent back down to the lower courts, where they will have to argue again, but they're on the right track to do that. I mean, the Alabama brief blows everything out of the water in terms of the ins and outs of what's going on with WPATH, et cetera. And so I think the law is going to end up being upheld one way or the other, and it's going to be up to us to take any kind of glimmer of good language that the opinion is written with, to be able to hold on to it and make more of it in other areas.
Candice, I also just would love for you to give a Spark Notes version of your speech, which just put such a joy in my heart, and I felt so empowered by your words when I was listening to it. I think in part because, as I told you, I had spent the last Thanksgiving week debating with my lawyer grandfather, who was making it difficult for me and twisting my tongue, and then I hear your speech and I'm like, this is what I was trying to articulate so well, and you just did it like such a you must have a law degree or something. So if I'd love for you to just kind of give a little, and obviously we'll promote your speech and post videos of it and whatnot, but if you could just kind of give us an idea of what you were talking about in your speech.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, that was what was so great about the way that Do No Harm pulled up so many diverse speakers, and we all got to put out there what our takes are, so that it becomes so clear that there are 150 great reasons to be opposed to pediatric gender medicine of any kind, right? And so I took the opportunity to try to pull it back into the conceptual framework and say, look at this through a historical lens. Look at the way that this seems new right now, but it's only the belief in gender identity that's new. That might be a new phrase and a new framework right now, but throughout history, we have had, groups and cults spring up to fall prey to the idea that sacrificing your body, sacrificing of children for some greater good, for some ephemeral, spiritual, mystical, greater good, is some kind of positive thing. And every time that's cropped up throughout history, if you step back and realize it, we have stepped back and realized, no, there is no good justification ever. There is never going to be a good justification for sacrificing bodily health for some kind of spiritual pursuit. It's no different than castrating young boys hundreds of years ago. It's no different than the female genital mutilation that has gone on in different ways for ages and ages. So the evil behind this is old, even though the manifestation in the belief of in a pseudoscience of gender identity is new. So it's our generation, it's our times, it's our era's moment to come to terms with the history that we can learn from, and to choose once again to say, we're going to be a good and decent society. And so we're just going to take this off the table. And that's not a burden for kids to hear, right? It's not a burden for kids to grow up knowing the truth that sex is immutable and binary, and that you just are either male or female. That's a wonderful thing for kids to hear. It's part of the very essence of being human and of personhood. It grants you dignity to solidly and with confidence know who you are. And it doesn't limit what you do.
And that's why I cried at the rally, because I was so moved right there. Thank you, Candice.
Well, it was a fantastic experience. And we're kind of lucky that a case has gone up to the Supreme Court this fast. And so to bring this all to a head as quickly as has happened in the last few years is an opportunity. And I think we're going to build off this. I think even though at the end of the day, it might not be some all-in-one solution from this one case to these problems of battling gender identity, I think it's going to be at least a victory of some kind that we can use, just like they had been using and abusing the Bostock decision for the last 4 years. I think this is going to be our decision that we're going to get to use pieces of it to push into other areas from here on out. Yeah, I wish I could stay on even longer. Thank you. And I can't wait to talk to everybody again.
Yeah, thank you
so much,
Candice.
Candice.
Bye.
Glenna, I was just curious about some of the interactions you had with the media and also with John Fetterman.
I took at least 8 interviews on Wednesday morning. So I realized later 2 of them were with CNN. Very different interviews, by the way. But because I just couldn't even, it was a blur. And it was very interesting. And there are a range of outlets. So like big ones like CNN, Fox, New York Times, like some student journalists, left and right. And over again, though, they were just completely surprised by us and not ready to, like, just confused. So the CNN one actually started, like, we had, and this was like maybe like the noisiest point, and we're like the crowded area, but we're definitely standing on the side of the plaza that belongs to Tennessee. Like, it's not ambiguous. And we're standing behind the LGB Alliance banner, and I'm holding the conversion therapy sign, and everyone around me is holding various like Democrats against this or gay people or whatever. And we have a few minutes where I talk to the reporter before we start, and I could say what I'm doing, whatever, and I'm a lesbian. It's like, okay, so now we're rolling. And she says, so how does it feel to you as a member of the LGBTQ community to be seeing transgender rights under attack? And I said, well, I support the attack. I like, I do what? And like both her, she and the cameraman go, like just visibly, and she goes, okay, well then, how do you feel about that then? So that's how the interview starts. And then at one point, and as a lot of my interviews did, she was like pushing back. She doesn't have a poker face. None of these people had any poker face. And like, that's fine. Like, they were, average age was pretty young. Okay. But like, nobody was just dispassionately asking. No, I think the students actually were the most professional ones.
Of high school students walking past and like, on school trips, like learn about DC. I did something like that when I was in high school, and they were the ones that were just like, wow, what's going on? We had a group of kids from Utah. They were just like, so can you tell us about this? And you're right. They were very, neutral seeming and just asking objective questions.
Right.
And it was so refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is so interesting. Yeah, but so I was getting a lot of pushback in interviews where they would try to be neutral. They would even try to use my term, so which was making it interesting, because they would be like, well, then what would you, because I kept using the term sex, obviously, and they would say like, well, then what would you say about somebody but who is like the opposite sex and the sex that they are? Wait a second. Like, they would actually start to talk themselves in circles and hear themselves and be like, okay, so what do you think about that? And I would be like, well, they're not the opposite sex of what they are, because yeah. I a little bit on that, but it was just like very funny at that level. So I was getting that kind of pushback from CNN, and like, well, what about this? But don't you think kids know themselves? Is it they don't know they're the opposite sex? That like just like stuff like really basic stuff like that all day long. And so she's like, but you are a lesbian who's had to fight for your rights, or no, it's like, you're a queer person who had to fight for your rights, and so then don't you think that other queer people should get to fight for their rights? And so then I gave her a lecture about the meaning of queer versus lesbian, and how I told her I was a lesbian, which means homosexual, and she was like getting annoyed. She's like, okay, yeah, just you could tell she was just like, oh god. And then the last question. So then she goes, and like I remember her cameraman had like the same expression she did. They were both like, oh. And so then she asked, like, but don't you think that transgender people should have a right to health care? And I said, what? Like, Americans don't have a right to health care. Why should we have a right to quack health care? And then like they just walk away from me. Like, they just like drop the mic, and they're like, oh god, they just walk. So none of my favorite parts of that interview were aired, but like they were actually fair in choosing a quote where I was saying our message about gender nonconformity. So it turned out to be fine. I mean, I was not as eloquent as I should have been, but it was my 8th interview on an extremely cold 5-hour morning. So yeah, CNN.
And what happened with Fetterman? I know you're trying to get that you're a Fetterman.
Yes. And by the way, so I mentioned on X that like Jose kept like pointing things out to me, and then I would like be able to photograph them, or because I'm apparently insensate. So I wasn't even noticing that like Born This Way was playing. I wasn't noticing that somebody immediately in front of me had pulled out a needle and was about to stab herself in the arm with it. Like Jose was like, look at that. Yeah. You weren't there for that, Sylvia? I have. Oh, it's on my X, but this is impossible to find now. So like a bunch of women, after they started invading our side, like there's like this group of them, and we had kind of a planter in front of our banner, like a few feet in front, and a group of them stand around the planter, and they pull out with this packet of like needles, and I don't know what it is. We could only guess, but needles and some kind of they're filling up the needles with something, and they just like had the needles out. They're like whipping it out, the syringe and the vials, and it was like, what are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? And they were shooting up. They were filming each other shooting up because that was their protest.
I'm assuming.
I think that was their message. Yeah. And yeah, so that was their protest. They were deliberately doing it on our side in front of us. And it was funny they did it in front of me because I'm the one who's always like, it's steroids. We need to tell everyone it's steroids. And they did it right in front of me, and I got to make a tweet out of it. So yeah, I would not have noticed Fetterman, but Jose pointed him out. So just like for viewers, so this the Supreme Court is just right across the street from the Capitol. So like, we were facing the Capitol, and Fetterman came from there and out into the street because he was headed over to the other side of the rally where the cool people were, like Alana Glazer and Elliot Page. So he was on his way, and he stopped for like to do a little bit before a camera. So I like ran around, and I had my sign, and I was like, you know, Senator Fetterman, like, I'm a Democrat, I'm gay, and I support Tennessee in this. This is gender medicine is dangerous for kids. And he was you know, he's very tall, and so he was like just going like this, and blah, blah. And but then when I said, I think it was when I said I'm a Democrat, he turns, and then he actually looks at me, which he hadn't done before. And then there's like this moment of like, ah! Like he did a double take, and I think he was noticing like the gay stuff, like short hair. I said Democrat, and it was like, you know, and then he was like, I don't want to know this. And then he just did his normal politician thing and walked. But there was a moment there where he was like, WTF, you know, which is so typical. Like all the journalists were surprised. Yeah.
I think that's the biggest, most important thing that came out of this, really, is that we got some of our, you know, Democrat, gay folks in there to basically create that, to break that wall of saying this is a totally right issue or a totally left issue, you know? And I think, you know, introducing that cognitive dissonance with people was just brilliant. That's what we needed to do.
I'm so excited about it. And so the media coverage was all over the place. So there were some that accurately quoted us. Most of them got our signs in, and that is because they had to, because our signs were everywhere, because we really were like a big percentage of the overall rally. And so that is good. The New York Times had a ridiculous article. And this hurts me because it's my hometown paper, and they kind of like control everybody's minds where I live. So their article was that there was a culture war. They painted it as left, right. Their photos were carefully cropped to only show white people and like not show any of our sides. Like they clearly had this like theme they were going for. And they really had to choose because like it was a diverse rally with lots of colorful signs with gay stuff on it. And they were like, they just had like a few guys holding Tennessee signs. Yes, they were there, but and like their narrative was all like that we were all wearing black, it said. And so we were Antifa. And that was not the vibe. It was freezing, so people were wearing dark coats. Like, and in fact, a lot of people were wearing colorful coats, like Sylvia. So
yeah, except my bright orange one, where you know I
Yeah.
stood out like a sore thumb.
yeah, there were, yeah, in a good way. And there were, when I looked at photos, I was like, there were colorful or white coats all over the place. So there were like all these little notes throughout, kind of dinging us. And then like the quote, they have a quote from a detransitioner, which is good. And then there's like a rebuttal to the quote where she's like, I wish somebody had stopped me, like the doctors or my parents or whatever. And then the New York Times right said, but you know, parents can still stop you or something like that under this law. I forgot what it said, but it was just like, you know, they were really giving us short shrift, and they were totally hiding the fact that this was a diverse rally on our side, and they were still doing the left-right thing, saying it's a culture war. And I had given a long interview to one of the reporters, where he was one of these guys who had no poker face and was clearly disgusted by everything I said, and then just walked away from me at some point.
Talk about the utter failure of our media, right? The media is supposed to inform, and they're not informing at all.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm just talking about one outlet. I haven't scoured all of them, but New York Times has a real problem. Like, I watch it closely because, again, I live here, so I follow them on local news. I've noticed that, like, New York Times is huge, right? They're a behemoth, like the biggest in America. We also have a bunch of scrappy little outlets in New York City. Like, they're nonprofits, they're only a few years old. They are doing a much better job at covering all the local corruption here than the New York Times is. And you have to notice that. Like, New York Times should be kicking their butt every single day of the week, and they're actually like always behind. And I think that's because they have like maybe there's a culture that pervades more than one bureau there. That's about kind of not challenging official narratives. Like, that is a trend I've noticed across bureaus in the New York Times, and it's definitely the case in their gender coverage. And obviously, I don't mean it's a huge organization, so they have some writers who I love, and I rely on them. Unfortunately, I feel like we can't break free of the New York Times, but they have. So, and I say this. So a lot of my normie friends say like, oh, the New York Times coverage has really improved on gender recently, or they've had some articles that like kind of broke the mold, but they only perceive that because they don't know the subject at all, except from what the New York Times tells them. So actually, like the New York Times has not improved that much. They've only allowed in like the tiniest little bit of like, okay, the cash review exists. a detransitioner exists, but they're doing the bare minimum of acknowledging that while still following the principles of like quote unquote transgender child and pronouns and calling it a culture war issue in left right. So they're still doing almost everything wrong. But
thank you for bringing that up. I was actually going to ask about that because I have heard some people say, "Oh, the New York Times coverage is really improving on this issue," and so it is sort of disappointing that they're still
like every couple of years, they've always had an okay story. If you trace it back, there are some interesting stories from the mid 2015s before everything went dark, in the mid 2010s. And then there was an Emily Bazelon case in like 2021. So like they've always had this like tiny bit of skepticism or like ability to ask questions, but then they rein it back really quickly. And like their style guide is still really bad. They're still not questioning the premises. When people think of what those better pieces are, they were usually actually in the opinion section, which is a way of just kind of undermining the whole. Because that gives the impression that our side is all opinion and the science is in the.
It's a good point. A lot of that is relegated to the opinion section. So are there any other final closing thoughts that you have, Glenna?
Oh, I just want to reiterate how much fun it was to go there. I'm especially glad I got to meet Sylvia in person and Candice in person and a bunch of other people as well. And I actually hadn't even thought about going until Joss asked me to make a video like on way back on election night. And then I was like, oh, like if I'm making a video for it, then I guess I should actually go. And like I don't like in hindsight, that seems kind of basic. Like, of course I'm so into this issue, why wouldn't I go? But I was like, oh, I'm not an activist. So then I went. I'm really glad I did. And I'm so glad everybody else did because there are so many photos of us. Our existence cannot be denied now. And I think that we all kind of got excited about maybe doing things in the future as well. So I'm looking forward to whatever those next actions are because we need to keep getting our voices out there. And like I've said before, because we're a small percentage of the population, like even if every gay person knew as much as we know and felt the same way we felt, we'd still be small. And so we just have to like kind of punch above our weight and try harder than like, a straight person would have to in order to get their perspective out there. But I think we can.
Absolutely. And we're so glad that you did come, Glenna. We're glad, Sylvia, you did a great job representing our org, and we're going to publish your speech because it was a terrific speech that you gave. And I think it's really important that gay and lesbian people and bisexual people are part of this coalition and are visible in this coalition. And like you said, Glenna, hopefully we'll have other actions where we can keep the ball rolling and hopefully put in some more cracks in that stupid narrative that the mainstream media wants to impose on us. So with that, thank you all for coming. We will be back next week. Remember to like and subscribe. Also remember to follow Glenna on Twitter, follow Candice on Twitter if you're not already. Thank you, everyone.